Welcome to Starplanet One Shots. I am your host, the tenebrous Arius Valo. In today's episode, we will be showcasing a science fiction sword and sorcery story from the universe 1983, featuring the classic character HUN-TOR, a barbaric hero who originated in pulp magazines in the 1930s. Created by Ronald S. Kane in 1932, HUN-TOR has since been adapted to books, comics, films, television programs, video games, and role-playing games. Today, we will be diving into HUN-TOR's first appearance in How to Create a Monster, first published in Amazing Stories of Sorcery from the Future by Ace Magazines in 1932. Now, dear travelers, let's begin. Amidst the desolate canyons of the planet HUN-TOR, nestled within the shadows of towering cliffs that glinted with metallic hues, lay the colony settlement of Rosia. The settlement's skyline was dominated by structures of gleaming alloys, their surfaces etched with runes reminiscent of a time when ancient science was known as magic and the mighty ruled supreme. These towering edifices stood in stark contrast to the weathered stone pillars and grand archways that marked the remnants of a bygone era. Rosia was a marvel of both past and present. The buildings, constructed from rare alloys that shimmered under the twin suns, were adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of an age long forgotten. Each rune held a piece of history, a fragment of the knowledge that once governed this land. The modern architecture intertwined seamlessly with the ancient ruins, creating a tapestry of eras that defined the unique character of Rosia. In the heart of Rosia, the central plaza boasted a colossal obelisk, its surface pulsating with an otherworldly energy. This obelisk, a relic from an advanced civilization, served not only as a monument to the past, but also as a source of power, lighting the town with an eerie glow. The obelisk's light was a constant reminder of the civilization's glorious and enigmatic past, a beacon that stood watch over the town. As the twin suns of HUN-TOR set, casting long shadows across the canyon, the town was bathed in a surreal twilight. The sky turned a deep, burnt orange, and the cliffs glowed with an ethereal luminescence. The air was thick with anticipation as the day transitioned into night, a time when the mysteries of Rosia seemed to come alive. Suddenly, a commotion disturbed the streets, shattering the evening calm. A group of large, burly men chased a woman and a child through the bustling streets. The woman, her dark hair matted with sweat and streaked with dirt, was covered in a blood-stained cloak. Her eyes, filled with determination and fear, darted around as she navigated the narrow alleyways. The young boy clutched tightly to her hand, his small legs struggling to keep up with her frantic pace. The streets of Rosia were a maze of narrow passages and hidden corners. The woman and the boy dashed down a back alley, their pursuers hot on their heels. The alley was lined with the remnants of ancient stone structures, their weathered surfaces whispering secrets of the past. The woman's cloak billowed behind her as she ran, the blood on it a stark contrast to the dull stone around them. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed forward, glancing over her shoulder to see the men gaining ground. They were ruthless, their faces twisted with anger and determination. The leader of the group, a hulking figure with a scar running down his cheek, barked orders at his comrades, urging them to move faster. The woman's mind raced. She had to find a way to lose them. Her eyes scanned the alley for an escape route, for anything that could give them an advantage. She spotted a narrow gap between two buildings, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was a risk, but it was their only chance. "Come on, we have to squeeze through here," she whispered urgently to the boy. He nodded, his wide eyes reflecting his trust in her. They slipped into the gap, the rough edges of the buildings scraping against their clothes. The space was tight, and the woman had to turn sideways to make her way through. The boy followed, his small size making it slightly easier for him. They emerged on the other side into a small courtyard, hidden from the main street. For a moment, they paused to catch their breath. The woman crouched down, placing her hands on the boy's shoulders. "Stay close to me, no matter what," she instructed, her voice firm but gentle. The boy nodded again, his eyes filled with determination. The sounds of the men grew louder as they entered the alley, their heavy footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The woman knew they didn't have much time. She scanned the courtyard, looking for a way to continue their escape. There, across the courtyard, was an old wooden door partially hidden behind a stack of crates. With renewed urgency, the woman led the boy to the door. She pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "This way," she said, guiding the boy down the steps. The door creaked shut behind them, the noise masked by the growing shouts of their pursuers. The staircase led to an underground passage, lit by faint, glowing runes etched into the walls. The air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the dry heat of the surface. The woman moved quickly but cautiously, aware that they could encounter more dangers down here. The boy stayed close, his hand still gripping hers tightly. As they ventured deeper into the passage, the sounds from above faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The runes cast a soft blue light, illuminating the path ahead. The woman's mind was racing, trying to remember the stories she had heard about these ancient tunnels. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a larger chamber. The ceiling soared high above them, supported by massive stone pillars covered in more glowing runes. In the center of the chamber stood another obelisk, smaller than the one in the central plaza, but equally mesmerizing. Its surface pulsed with the same otherworldly energy, casting an eerie glow over the chamber. The woman knew they couldn't stay here for long. She spotted another passage on the far side of the chamber and led the boy towards it. As they approached, she heard a noise behind them. She turned to see a shadow moving in the darkness, followed by the glint of metal. The men had found them. "Run!" she shouted to the boy, pushing him towards the passage. She turned to face their pursuers, her eyes blazing with defiance. She reached under her cloak and drew a small, ornate dagger, its blade shimmering with a faint blue light. She was ready to fight, to protect the boy with her life if necessary. The boy hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide with fear and concern. "Go," she urged, her voice filled with urgency. He finally turned and ran towards the passage. As he reached the entrance, two hands reached out from the darkness and grabbed him. He let out a scream before his mouth was covered. A large man in a dark purple coat spun him back towards where he came and held him in place. The woman screamed, "HUN-TOR," and began to run towards the child. The men closed in on her, cutting her off. Their leader, a large muscular man with fur-skin garments and a mohawk, stepped forward with a sneer. "You've caused us a lot of trouble, woman," he growled, his eyes narrowing. She charged at them, her dagger held firmly in her hand. The leader lunged at her, his massive form barreling forward. The woman sidestepped, slashing at him with her dagger. He slapped her to the ground. A voice echoed from the tunnel they had entered from. "Enough," a man's voice commanded. They all turned towards the tunnel. A tall man dressed in a tight black flight suit with red trim, similar to what the ancient chariot warriors wore, stood there. He wore a tattered black cape draped over his right shoulder. His eyes were cold, and his pupils were gray. "Moanica, Moanica, Moanica," "Darling, you know better than to run from us," he said, his expression cold. "When I found you, you were starving on the streets of this shaghole of a planet." "Let him go, Kusa," she yelled. "Moanica, I told you when I took you in that your belly would be full and your purse bursting with credits. As long as you remember that you're mine now," he said. "You sold me to anyone who would pay. Let my son go," she demanded, crawling for her dagger. The mohawked man kicked it away. "The deal was that I own you, whore. That means I can do what I want," Kusa yelled. The mohawked man stomped his foot onto Moanica's back, pinning her to the floor. She let out a scream. "So let me get this straight. You think because you get yourself pregnant, you can just leave us? What life do you think you were going to?" Kusa said. "One without you," she screamed. "A lone woman and a child all by themselves on this planet wouldn't last long, bitch. Or did you think a white knight would come to your rescue and sweep you and some bastard child up in his arms and away to paradise?" Kusa mocked. The young boy tried to wrestle free to protect his mother, to no avail. Moanica screamed as the mohawked man pushed her further into the floor. "You stupid girl. No man is going to want a loose piece of shit like you," Kusa said, laughing. "Besides, you forget. I own you, whore. And in turn that means I own the boy too." Kusa looked at his men and gestured. "Bring the boy. He will be of value in the mines. As for the meat, it's become old and rotten. Dispose of it." Kusa turned away, walking back through the tunnel. The young boy tried to scream as he watched the men slaughter his mother in front of him. Her screams filled the chamber as the boy was dragged away, his small form struggling against the grip of the large man. The echoes of her agony haunted the dim passageways as the boy's tears mingled with the shadows. 20 years later, the mines were a labyrinth of shadowy tunnels and vast underground caverns deep beneath the planet's rugged surface. Here, the air was thick with dust, and the constant hum of machinery reverberated through the rock. The walls of the tunnels were rough and jagged, hewn by generations of miners in their relentless pursuit of the planet's most precious resource. Crystals, known as tharlite, are highly sought after for their unique energy properties. In the dim light of the mine, they emitted a soft glow, casting a pinkish hue on everything around them. The faint illumination from the crystals was the only light source in the mines, creating an eerie atmosphere. The miners, toiling away in this subterranean world, were a grimy, weary lot. Their bodies were smeared with dirt and grime. Their stripped-down bodies were coated in a layer of dust that clung to them like a second skin. Sweat mingled with the dirt, creating streaks of mud on their skin, and their hands were calloused and cracked from handling the rough tools and jagged rocks. Each miner carried a pickaxe or a pneumatic drill, the tools clanging and hissing as they worked tirelessly to extract the tharlite crystals from the rock. The constant noise of their labor filled the tunnels, accompanied by the occasional shout or groan of effort. The work was backbreaking, the conditions harsh, and the air filled with the scent of sweat, metal, and earth. Massive carts, loaded with the glowing pink crystals, were pushed and pulled through the tunnels on rusted tracks, their wheels squealing in protest. The crystals were carefully loaded by teams of miners who handled them with a mix of reverence and exhaustion, knowing that these luminous stones were their only ticket to survival, and for some, a slim hope of escape from the oppressive depths. In this harsh and unforgiving place, the miners forged a camaraderie born of shared struggle and hardship. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices echoing off the stone walls, sharing stories of home, dreams of a better life, and the small victories of their daily toil. Amongst the dark, oppressive atmosphere of the mines, a young man, about the age of 25, strained against a giant lever attached to a crystal grinder. His body was large and muscular, sculpted by years of hard labor. His long blonde hair hung in untamed waves, framing a face set with determination. His teeth were gritted as he pushed the lever, the grinding machine emitting a low, rumbling noise as it pulverized the precious pink crystals. A large guard, wearing a fur-skin vest and tattered black pants, walked past HUN-TOR with a smirk and a glare. A large sword was strapped to the guard's hip, and he carried a whip that he brandished menacingly. "Keep pushing, HUN-TOR. The boss needs the next load, ASAP," the guard said with a sneer, enjoying the sight of the young man's struggle. As the guard walked away, an old man, Asian in appearance, emerged from a dark corner of the mine and approached HUN-TOR. The old man was shirtless and shoeless, his long white beard reaching down to his chest. "It's your time now, kid," he said in a low voice. "I've taught you everything you need to know to get your revenge." HUN-TOR looked at the old man, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and concern. "And what of you?" HUN-TOR asked. "I shall get you your weapon," the old man replied. "What?" "They'll kill you, Metter," HUN-TOR said, his voice tinged with fear for his mentor. "That's okay, son. This is no world for old men. Now get ready," Metter said, his voice steady and resolute. As if on cue, the guard returned, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Metter near HUN-TOR. "What are you doing, old man?" the guard yelled, suspicion lacing his voice. "Waiting for you," Metter replied, his stare unwavering. "What?" the guard said, confusion flashing across his face as he walked towards Metter, his hand outstretched to grab him. In a swift, unexpected move, Metter stepped aside, avoiding the guard's grasp. With a speed that belied his age, he struck the guard's outstretched arm, causing the guard to stagger back in surprise. Metter's eyes glinted with a fierce determination as he moved, his years of wisdom and training coming to the fore. The guard snarled, recovering from his initial shock. "You think you can challenge me, old man?" he growled, reaching for his whip. But before he could strike, Metter lunged forward, delivering a powerful blow to the guard's midsection. The guard doubled over, gasping for breath, as Metter swiftly disarmed him, the whip falling to the ground. The old man, Metter, quickly grabbed hold of a sharp rock that looked like a dagger, obviously put there by him for this exact moment. With a swift and powerful thrust, he drove the rock deep into the guard's skull. The guard convulsed before collapsing, dead. Before HUN-TOR could react, an incoming guard sword slashed through the air, striking Metter down. The old man fell to the ground, a serene smile still lingering on his lips as his lifeblood pooled around him. Rage and sorrow surged through HUN-TOR as he watched his mentor fall. The weight of the sword in his hand felt heavier now, burdened with the loss of the man who had taught him everything he knew. But it also filled him with a fierce resolve. Metter had sacrificed himself so that HUN-TOR could have a chance at freedom and revenge. HUN-TOR gripped the sword tightly, his knuckles white, as the guards closed in on him. The tunnel was filled with the clamor of footsteps and the shouts of the guards. The glow of the pink crystals cast an eerie light on the scene, illuminating the faces of his enemies. Drawing on everything Metter had taught him, HUN-TOR moved with speed and precision. He parried the first guard's strike and countered with a swift slash, cutting the guard down. The second guard lunged at him, but HUN-TOR sidestepped and drove his sword into the man's side. The battle in the tunnel was brutal and chaotic. HUN-TOR's muscles burned with exertion, but he fought on. His sword danced in the dim light, each strike more desperate than the last. HUN-TOR was slowly pushed back down the dimly lit hallway towards a large metallic door. Sweat dripped down his face as he fended off the relentless advances of the guards. Suddenly, he heard a loud click and a hiss, the telltale signs of the door behind him beginning to open. He kicked a guard hard in the chest, sending the man crashing into his comrades and buying himself a moment to gather his breath. HUN-TOR glanced to his right and saw a tangle of wires and controls mounted on the wall. He had no idea what they controlled, but they looked important. Feeling the desperation of impending defeat, HUN-TOR made a snap decision. If he was going to fall, he would take as many of these bastards with him as possible. As the door hissed again and began to unlock, he slashed his sword into the wires and controls. Sparks flew, and the door ground to a halt, inches apart. From the other side, he could hear the frustrated yells of guards trying to get through. The guards he had been fighting regained their footing and began to close in on him again. HUN-TOR braced himself, ready for the next assault. Suddenly, a pitchfork was driven into the skull of one of the guards, the man collapsing with a gurgling scream. The other guards turned in shock, only to be attacked by a group of miners, their faces grim and determined. The conflict exploded into chaos. The miners, armed with makeshift weapons, pickaxes, shovels, and whatever they could find, clashed with the guards. HUN-TOR's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief as he saw his fellow prisoners rise up. One miner, a burly man with a wild mane of hair and dark, piercing eyes, swung a heavy sledgehammer with devastating effect, crushing a guard's chest armor and sending him sprawling. Another miner, a wiry, agile woman, moved with lightning speed, her knife flashing as she slashed at the guard's exposed flesh. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation and rage. The guards, taken aback by the unexpected resistance, faltered. Some tried to regroup and press the attack, while others were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the miners' assault. HUN-TOR fought alongside them, his sword cutting through the air with deadly precision. He parried a guard's thrust and countered with a slash across the man's chest, blood spraying the wall. The miners moved to his side, picking up the fallen guard's weapons and joining the fight with renewed vigor. Amidst the chaos, HUN-TOR noticed one miner who stood out. He was a tall, powerfully built man with a shaved head and a long, jagged scar running down the side of his face. His eyes burned with a fierce determination as he wielded a salvaged guard's sword with practiced skill. He turned to HUN-TOR, a grim smile on his face. "Promise me you won't die until you send that gray-eyed bastard to hell, HUN-TOR," the miner said, his voice hoarse but resolute. HUN-TOR nodded, the weight of the promise settling on his shoulders. "I promise," he replied. The miner then turned to the large group of miners now gathered in the hallway, their hands gripping the discarded weapons of the guards they had killed or forced to retreat. "Our freedom is near, brothers. Kusa is HUN-TOR's, the rest are ours." The miners roared in approval, their collective voice echoing through the tunnels. As the metallic door was dragged open by the guards on the other side, a wave of fresh enemy troops began to flood the tunnel. The sight of the armed miners gave them pause, but their hesitation was fleeting. The tunnel erupted into a brutal melee. The miners fought with a desperate intensity, knowing that this was their chance for freedom. The guards, though well-trained and armored, struggled against the sheer determination and numbers of the miners. HUN-TOR was at the forefront, his sword a blur as he cut down one guard after another. The scarred miner fought beside him, a whirlwind of fury and strength. He hacked through the guards with a savage grace, his movements fluid and deadly. The wiry woman from earlier darted through the fray, her knife finding the gaps in the guard's armor with deadly precision. All around them, miners and guards clashed in a desperate struggle for control of the tunnel. The scarred miner noticed a gap in the battle and turned to HUN-TOR. "HUN-TOR, go!" he yelled, urgency in his voice. HUN-TOR met his gaze, seeing the fierce determination there, and nodded. The miner gestured towards the door, and HUN-TOR sprinted through the opening and into a dark hallway. The hallway was a strange fusion of natural rock and ancient technology, a testament to a long-lost civilization that once thrived here. The walls were rough and uneven, hewn from the rock of the planet itself, but interspersed with smooth metallic panels that glowed faintly with an eerie blue light. Intricate, weathered carvings adorned the walls, depicting scenes of celestial events and advanced machinery, their meanings long forgotten. Conduits and wires ran along the ceiling and walls, occasionally sparking and humming with residual energy. As HUN-TOR ran, his heavy footsteps echoed off the rock and metal, a rhythmic pounding that matched the frantic beating of his heart. He turned a corner sharply and collided with a guard, knocking the man to the ground. Instinctively, HUN-TOR drove his sword through the guard's chest, the blade sinking deep with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed onto HUN-TOR's face, warm and metallic, fueling his bloodlust and ferocity. He pulled the sword free and stared down at the dying guard with wide, fierce eyes before continuing his run. The hallway twisted and turned, a labyrinthine path leading deeper into the complex. Flickering lights from the ancient technology cast shifting shadows, adding to the sense of disorientation. The air was thick with the smell of dust, metal, and blood, and HUN-TOR could hear the distant sounds of the battle still raging behind him. Soon, he came across a spiral staircase rising up into a tower. The stairs were not made of stone but worn metal, their surfaces pitted and scarred from centuries of use. Each step clanged under his weight as he began to sprint up them, the sound echoing up the narrow shaft. The staircase wound tightly, and HUN-TOR's muscles burned with the effort, but the thought of killing Kusa drove him onward. As HUN-TOR ascended the spiral staircase, guards sporadically descended to intercept him. The narrow confines of the staircase left little room for maneuvering, but HUN-TOR used the environment to his advantage. The first guard appeared suddenly around a bend, his sword raised to strike. HUN-TOR parried the blow, the clash of metal echoing through the shaft. With a swift counterattack, he slashed across the guard's chest, sending him tumbling back down the stairs, his screams fading into the depths below. Further up, two guards rushed him simultaneously. HUN-TOR ducked under the first guard's swing and drove his sword into the second guard's gut, twisting the blade before kicking the body off the staircase. The remaining guard tried to overpower him with brute strength, but HUN-TOR shoved him against the railing and with a powerful kick, sent him plummeting to his death. A third guard lunged at HUN-TOR from a narrow landing. HUN-TOR sidestepped, grabbed the guard by the collar, and used the momentum to hurl him over the edge. The guard's desperate grasp at the railing was in vain as he disappeared into the abyss below. As HUN-TOR neared the top, a particularly burly guard blocked his path. The guard swung a heavy mace, forcing HUN-TOR to dodge and weave. HUN-TOR waited for an opening, and when it came, he struck quickly. He ducked under a wide swing, slashed the guard's hamstring, and then delivered a fatal blow to the chest. The guard crumpled, lifeless, blocking the stairs. HUN-TOR stepped over the body, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Finally, he reached the top of the staircase and emerged into a large open chamber. The room was dominated by ancient technology, massive consoles with glowing screens, control panels covered in alien symbols, and towering machines that hummed with energy. HUN-TOR took a moment to catch his breath, his eyes scanning the room for any immediate threats. At the far end of the chamber, he saw a large red door. With determined steps, he made his way towards it, his sword still ready in his hand. He cautiously pushed open the door, revealing a long hallway beyond. The hallway was a stark contrast to the utilitarian chamber he had just left. It was lavishly decorated with paintings and sculptures, all of them reflecting Kusa's twisted sense of grandeur. The walls were lined with portraits of Kusa, each one more grandiose and exaggerated than the last. Statues of naked women in beautiful, seductive poses adorned alcoves, some depicting pairs of women locked in passionate embraces. The opulence and decadence of the hallway filled HUN-TOR with disgust, a stark reminder of the man he was about to confront. He moved quietly but swiftly down the corridor, his senses heightened and ready for any more guards that might appear. As he neared the end of the hallway, the sense of anticipation and danger grew. With a deep breath, HUN-TOR pushed open the next door, ready to face whatever lay beyond. Inside was a lavish room decorated much the same as the hallway, exuding an air of hedonistic luxury. A gigantic bed sat in the center of the room, clearly designed for multiple women to engage in sexual pleasure or to just pleasure one man. The sheets were a decadent black silk, shimmering in the dim light, and scattered around the bed were huge pillows in vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the cold rock that HUN-TOR had been forced to use as bedding. Lavish animal fur rugs covered the floor, their rich textures and deep hues adding to the opulence. One wall of the room was a giant window that looked out over the landscape and into the night sky, the flames and explosions from the ongoing rebellion casting flickering shadows inside. As HUN-TOR stepped further into the room, he heard a scream. A small group of naked women fled the room, their bodies a verification to Kusa's excesses. Their skin glistened with sweat, and their eyes were wide with fear. They were all strikingly beautiful, their bodies toned and curvaceous, yet their faces bore the marks of fear and desperation. Their hurried movements made their long hair whip around, covering parts of their exposed bodies as they disappeared down the hallway. "How did I know it would be you?" said a familiar voice that HUN-TOR hadn't heard since the day his mother died. "How did I know it would be the son of a whore that would come for me?" HUN-TOR's gaze fixed on a tall figure standing in front of the large window, looking out at the flames and explosions that now engulfed his compound. The sounds of the rebellion echoed from below, a cacophony of chaos and vengeance. The man wore a black gown and held a lavish glass filled with wine. His silhouette was illuminated by the fiery glow outside. HUN-TOR gritted his teeth, recognizing the voice immediately. "Kusa," he said through clenched teeth. It was Kusa, but he was a shadow of his former self, old and not as strong as HUN-TOR remembered. Kusa turned to look at HUN-TOR, his once formidable presence diminished by age. His body, once muscular and imposing, was now gaunt and frail. The gown hung loosely on his frame, exposing his thin, bony chest and sagging skin. His hair, now a sparse gray, framed a face lined with wrinkles and wear. His gray eyes, however, retained their cold, calculating gleam. "How fitting," Kusa sneered, raising his glass in a mock toast. "The son of a whore, come to avenge his mother. Tell me, HUN-TOR, do you think you can kill me? Do you think you can end this?" HUN-TOR felt a surge of anger at the sight of Kusa's casual arrogance, his heart pounding with the memories of all the suffering this man had caused. "I don't just think it, Kusa," he said, stepping forward with determination. "I know it." Kusa laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed through the room. HUN-TOR tightened his grip on his sword, his muscles coiled and ready. This was the moment he had been waiting for. the moment to fulfill his promise and bring justice to his fallen comrades and his mother. He advanced towards Kusa, the flames outside casting a hellish glow on their confrontation. Soon, Kusa's smile faded, replaced by a serious, almost grim demeanor. "Kill him," he commanded sharply. In a flash, HUN-TOR was struck from behind with great force. The impact sent him flying across the room, and he crashed into a pile of credits and crystals, the sharp edges cutting into his skin. Dazed and in pain, he quickly scrambled to his feet and turned around to face his attacker. Standing before him was a formidable figure, dressed in dark, intimidating garb. The man wore a loose-fitting black tunic and loose-fitting trousers underneath. Over the tunic, a hooded cloak draped menacingly, and a headscarf masked his face, leaving only his piercing eyes visible. Around his waist was a wide, dark red belt or sash, giving him a sinister, martial appearance. HUN-TOR gripped his sword tighter, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this new threat. The man moved with the fluidity of a trained assassin, his stance poised and ready for another strike. The dim light from the flickering flames outside cast shadows across the room, making the assassin seem almost spectral. The assassin lunged at HUN-TOR with lightning speed. HUN-TOR barely had time to parry the blow, their swords clashing with a shower of sparks. The force of the impact sent vibrations up his arm, but he held firm. The assassin's eyes gleamed with cold determination as he pressed the attack, his movements precise and deadly. HUN-TOR ducked under a swift slash and countered with a powerful upward strike, but the assassin deftly sidestepped, his cloak billowing out behind him. The assassin retaliated with a series of rapid strikes, each one aimed with deadly accuracy. HUN-TOR blocked and dodged, his focus entirely on surviving the onslaught. The fight moved across the lavish room, the sounds of clashing swords and grunts of exertion filling the air. HUN-TOR maneuvered carefully, trying to use the room's opulence to his advantage. He kicked over a lavish table, sending it crashing towards the assassin, who effortlessly vaulted over it, his eyes never leaving HUN-TOR. With a surge of adrenaline, HUN-TOR launched a ferocious attack, his sword a blur as he aimed for the assassin's vital points. The assassin parried and dodged. The assassin delivered a backhanded strike to HUN-TOR. His cheek split open, exposing his teeth, and he fell to the floor in agony. As he looked up, he saw the assassin's hand, now revealing a lethal covering of countless razor-sharp blades protruding from its surface. HUN-TOR struggled to his feet, blood pouring down the side of his face and down his body. Gripping to his sword tightly, HUN-TOR feinted to the left and swung to the right. But the masked man parried effortlessly, countering with a swift kick to HUN-TOR's chest that sent him stumbling back. Gritting his teeth, HUN-TOR recovered and lunged again, his blade aimed at the attacker's heart. The masked man sidestepped, using his cloak to obscure HUN-TOR's vision and delivering a quick, sharp punch to his ribs. Pain shot through HUN-TOR's side as his flesh is ripped away, but he refused to yield. He swung his sword in a wide arc, forcing the attacker to retreat a step. Seizing the moment, HUN-TOR pressed the attack, driving the masked man back towards the bed. With a powerful downward slash, HUN-TOR aimed to end the fight, but the masked man caught the blade with his own, their faces inches apart. HUN-TOR could see the intensity in the attacker's eyes, the focus and training that spoke of a lifetime of combat. He pushed harder, trying to overpower his foe, but the masked man twisted his blade, disarming HUN-TOR with a deft move and sending his sword skittering across the floor. Desperation surged through HUN-TOR. He glanced around, spotting a heavy crystal ornament on a nearby table. He grabbed it and swung, catching the masked man off guard and striking him across the head. The attacker staggered, his grip on his weapon faltering. HUN-TOR took the chance to tackle the masked man, driving him to the ground. They grappled fiercely, fists and knees connecting in a brutal struggle. HUN-TOR's strength began to win out, his rage and determination giving him the edge. With a final desperate effort, he slammed the masked man's head against the floor, dazing him. HUN-TOR reached for his sword, blood pouring from his body. The assassin began to slowly make his way to his feet. HUN-TOR now stands over the man, and with a decisive strike, his sword cleaving through the assassin's neck. The headscarf fell away as the assassin crumpled to the floor, lifeless. As HUN-TOR staggered and breathed heavily, his focus remained fixed on Kusa. The older man's expression shifted from arrogance to pure fear as HUN-TOR approached. "You killed my mother." HUN-TOR's voice was thick with pain and rage, blood streaming down his face and side. In a desperate attempt to fend off his impending doom, Kusa grabbed a glass and hurled it at HUN-TOR. The glass shattered against HUN-TOR's face, cutting him deeply. HUN-TOR paused for a moment, a grim smile spreading across his bloodied features. Despite the agony coursing through him, he managed to utter defiantly, "What's one more scar, old man?" With relentless determination, HUN-TOR continued to advance towards Kusa. The tyrant's eyes darted around the lavish room, searching for an escape, but he found himself cornered against the glass window. "This is for my mother." HUN-TOR's voice resonated with steely resolve. Gripping his sword tightly, he lunged forward, driving the blade through Kusa's chest and into the glass window behind him. The impact pinned Kusa in place, blood trickling down the blade as Kusa gasped in disbelief. For a fleeting moment, Kusa's eyes lost focus, his breaths becoming shallow and irregular. Then, all was still. The tyrant who had terrorized them for so long was finally defeated. Exhausted and wounded, HUN-TOR staggered back, his strength waning. He collapsed to the ground, blood pooling around him as darkness threatened to overtake his vision. The room filled with his fellow miners, their faces a mix of awe and relief. They had witnessed the downfall of their oppressor and the courage of their comrade. Everything began to fade to black as HUN-TOR's consciousness slipped away. His last thoughts were of his mother. 8 months later, as the twin suns dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate canyons and rugged landscape, a lone figure stood at the edge of a canyon overlooking the bustling colony of Rosea. HUN-TOR, now heavily scarred and disfigured from his battles, stood tall in his loose-fitting black tunic and trousers, their fabric waving gently in the cool breeze. Beside him, a small land chariot floated silently with a soft hum, waiting patiently. Below in Rosea, life continued unabated, the colony rebuilding and thriving in the aftermath of liberation. HUN-TOR took in one last sweeping look at the place he had called home. Memories of his mother and the sacrifices made echoed in his mind. With a deep breath, HUN-TOR tied a dark black headscarf over his face, concealing the scars that now marked his features. His resolve was unwavering as he turned towards his chariot, mounting it with practiced ease. His gaze lingered briefly on the horizon, where the two suns dipped below the edge of the world. "I love you, Mom," he murmured softly, a vow and a farewell to the woman who had ignited his spirit and guided his purpose. With a flick of the controls, the land chariot roared to life, its engines thrumming with power. HUN-TOR glanced back at Rosea one last time, then set his sights forward. The vast expanse of Kutazar stretched out before him, its desolate beauty and the promise of new beginnings. And with that, true champions of the cause, our story has come to an end. I thank you for spending this time with us, and I look forward to seeing you again. Let your thoughts on the story be known in the comments. I truly look forward to reading them. So, Until next time, please like, comment, and subscribe. And until our paths cross again, I have been your host, Arius Vallo. See you in the shadows, my love.